Hello negotiators, this is Noa Sheer of Sheer Negotiations. I've been asked to make a video about the difference between men and women in negotiations. It's a very interesting topic, not discussed enough and very well researched. So there's actually a wealth of knowledge in the academic literature that I want to summarize for you today. And I'll do that by picking out the most interesting bits and pieces out of the research and putting that together as a narrative. Because I have a theory about the differences between women and men in negotiations, and I have a theory about how to capitalize on our strengths and minimize the differences to our advantage, the advantage of women. So in general, you should know that the research does not show any huge differences between men and women on average across all negotiations. That means that it's not the case that women will always negotiate better or worse than men. You can imagine some negotiations, particularly in my mind, I have examples of negotiating on behalf of your children, negotiating in social circumstances where women might be better than men in negotiation. But there is a lot of research to suggest that women are falling behind in negotiations within the workplace where they're negotiating on their own behalf. So you can imagine such negotiations as salary negotiations or job terms, compensation, that sort of thing. And in general, what we found, what the literature has found, is that there is a difference in women's propensity to recognize opportunities to better their circumstances. So men are more likely to take the chance of asking for something, even when there's no evidence that what they're asking for is even on the table, even available for the taking. Women indicate lower pay expectations. Men indicate higher likelihood of active negotiation, less likelihood of using traditional self-promotion strategies such as waiting for a salary review. So they might go and knock on doors where women would actually wait and see if they're recognized. Men see more opportunity for legitimate negotiations, whereas women shy away from that. So that's all based on research from 1994, from 2003. That's Babcock and Shaver. They're very famous researchers. And I have a theory on why that is, why there's such a difference between men and women and those particular types of negotiation. And the theory is built on a few things that I've drawn out of the research. The first is that there is a difference in locus of control. Now, locus of control is a spectrum that indicates the extent to which you feel that you are led by, or your life is controlled by external circumstances, as opposed to your life is controlled by your behavior from within. So anyone who rates very low on that spectrum will have a more internal locus of control, meaning what I do affects my surroundings, what I choose affects my life. It also means that you need to be more active in advancing your own interests. People who have an internal locus of control do not wait for the external world to shape their lives. They actually do what it takes to actively and proactively create their lives on their own. People who rate higher on the locus of control have an external locus of control, meaning that they feel that their fate, their surroundings, their peers, their boss, God, whatever it is, affect their circumstances. So it's an external effect on their own lives. And those people will sit and wait to be recognized. They feel like maybe they don't have control. They're not as proactive as the people who rate low on that spectrum. So there was research done, I think it was in 2003, yes, that found that women actually rate higher on the locus of control spectrum, meaning that men feel like they should be actively pursuing the things that they want in life, whereas women can be seen to wait or feel like they have less control. And I want to ask you, listening to this, does that feel right to you? Do you feel like, are you a woman who feels like we're living in a man's world? We're living in a world that we can control to a limit? A world where you need to sit to be recognized, or are you proactive in getting what you want? If you do feel like we're living in a man's world, or you feel like you have limited control, that wouldn't be surprising. If you take into consideration that women only had the right to vote in, I think it was 1893, and that was in New Zealand, that's not that long ago. Women and men have had very different opportunities across history, and so that's just one thing to consider. Another reason that is very compelling is that women invest in relationships and do not want to ruin or jeopardize those relationships with negotiation tactics that are competitive. And so when you're nurturing a relationship, you may be afraid to negotiate assertively for what you want for fear of losing that relationship. Another reason is that we don't want to be pushy or appear interested in money more than, the general benefit of the team or the general benefit of the workplace, because women are known to value that reputation of being the nurturer, the carer. That is also based on research, but I would encourage you to be critical about that and to really reflect on whether that is the sort of person that you are, or whether you're the sort of person who would like to prove that you can negotiate assertively, negotiate well as men, if not better than your peers, in order to serve your company. So that's something that we need to consider always. But that was the third reason. So again, the first is locus of control. The second is that we value our relationships and don't want to jeopardize them. And the third is that we don't want to seem greedy or too interested in our own benefit at the expense of the company. And there is a way to get around these biases. There are a few ways, actually. The first thing that we can do, and we learned this from research done in 2001 by Wade, is that we can pretend that we're negotiating on behalf of someone else or have a stakeholder. And the reason why that works is because when we negotiate on our own behalf, we may feel out of place or embarrassed or greedy to ask for something for our own benefit. But when we're negotiating on behalf of someone else, we have in mind that focus on the service to that other person. And so you can make that artificial. You don't have to actually have a stakeholder or a beneficiary. You can have a pretend one, future children, a mentor who's waiting to hear back from you after the negotiation to see how you did. Someone who might benefit in the long run, perhaps parents that you need to take care of in their older years. Maybe the benefit from this negotiation could help them then. That is one way to get around that weakness if you feel you have it. Another way is to be aware that men on average set an opening offer of 20 to 25% higher than women would on average. And so when you're asking for a price for your services, when you're asking for you're expressing salary expectations, or you're negotiating the price of something, perhaps that you're selling, you can ask for 20 to 25% higher than what you were initially going to ask for, particularly if that is cringeworthy or uncomfortable for you, because then you know that you're on par with those people who are much more ambitious in negotiations. So you could try that. The third thing to do is to seek power. Now, this comes from really, really interesting research done in 2013, so a little bit more recent. And I have critically gone over this research and I find it very compelling. So this is research by Hong and Van der Vist. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. So this is an experimental research setting, and they were using face-to-face distributive bargaining situations, meaning competitive negotiations. Participants were primed with sources of power, and then they compared how the participants who were not primed with power fared versus the participants who were. And they found that there was a huge difference between the women who had a source of power and the women who did not have a source of power. The women who were primed with power, meaning, well, I'll get into what sources of power there are, but the women who were primed with power fared much, much better. Not only did they start with more with higher opening offers, but they also had much higher outcomes. The men who were primed with power and the men who were not primed with power did not show a difference, meaning there was no substantial difference between them. And what ended up happening is, initially, the women who were not primed with power and the men who were not primed with power, there was a massive difference between them. But when the women were primed with power, they negotiated as well, if not better, than the men. And the men, there were no differences between the two groups. So what this tells us is that if you're a woman and you would like to do better in negotiations, it is worthwhile investing in some sources of power, empowering yourself in some way in order to come to the negotiation with more confidence, with a feeling that you are more secure and powerful. And what are those sources of power? The first one is a BATNA. BATNA means best alternative to the negotiated agreement, or in simpler terms, just having an alternative. So if I don't get this job here, I have another job waiting for me. If I don't buy this car here, there is another car, another model that I could buy just as easy. Having that alternative gives you the feeling that you're not desperate, and therefore you are more powerful in the negotiation. You are not dependent on the other person. You're not desperate to make the deal. Another source of power is having a plan with a strategy, which I can teach you happily if you're ever interested. And the third source of power is proper training in the art of persuasion. The gender difference in negotiation has implications for ongoing pay and promotion inequities. It is so very interesting and valuable to understand the insights that come from the academic literature. I really do urge you to look into it and read into it. And I also urge you to reflect on this topic. Do you feel disadvantaged, or do you feel that you are a good negotiator and gender has nothing to do with it? Do you feel like you shy away from conversations that are suddenly defined as negotiations? Do you feel like you easily approach someone in order to initiate a negotiation, even when there is no promise or offer of anything on the table? And more interestingly, what are your theories for why this is? Why is it that people behave in such ways? I'd be interested to hear from you. I'm always available to discuss this further. And if you'd ever like to know more, please do contact me.